Hi everyone and welcome to the channel. Now in a moment I'm going to show you something, but before I do I just feel like I kind of need to explain something first. You see, I've decided that it's time for a new Windows XP daily use machine build, and if you've seen the channel before you may recall that a while back I did a new daily use Windows 98 machine, and that machine was based on my actual Windows 98 machine from back when I had it. And it was really enjoyable to build, I had massive nostalgic kick from it, and it's been great fun to use, all the time since. So I thought, well, why not do the same thing for Windows XP? I'll recreate my actual Windows XP computer from back then. And by back then, we're talking sort of just after the turn of the millennium, the early 2000s. And that's around the time that the PC modding community and the modding market started to get kind of really big. It really took off. I mean, not to say that people weren't modding computers before that, they've modded computers as long as computers have existed. I mean, I first started modding my first PC back in the mid to late 90s. But that was when it got big, and when these sort of niche things get big for the first time, they're a little bit like the Wild West. There wasn't really any consensus, for want of a better word, of PC mods and necessarily what they were all about. I mean, take nowadays, for example, you see lots of trends in PC modding. So you see some builds where, for example, it's RGB on all the things, or you see a lot of builds where, say, they pick a colour, like, say, solid white, with just a few highlights. So they might have, say, an icy blue coolant tube running through it. And, don't get me wrong, these mods look fantastic. They must take a huge amount of time and money and effort to do something like that. But back then, as I say, there wasn't these sort of consensuses around PC modding. You had this Wild West sort of atmosphere. And you couple that with the sort of crazy turn of the millennium time that we were living through, and it means that some of the PC mods from back then, well, they were, say, interesting to say the least. So what I'm going to show you is a couple of pictures of my actual Windows XP machine. Now, there's only these two pictures of this machine that exist, and they were taken on what is sadly a potato quality webcam, so there's very little quality in them at all, and they were taken in low light conditions, so the little bit of quality that you did have, well, that had pretty much gone. But nonetheless, don't say I didn't warn you. Right, are you ready? Here goes. Yeah, sorry about that. I think perhaps both the quality and content of that picture might just be a little bit shocking. So, let's have another look. So here is my Windows XP PC as it was on, I think, the 11th of December 2003. Now, we're not going to worry too much about the hardware in this video. If we're going to recreate this thing, the first thing we need to get right is this sort of rather distinctive case. Now, I bought this case from the local PC market. It was one of those sort of travelling ones that comes to your local leisure centre sort of every couple of months, that sort of thing. It cost me about £40 from what I can remember, and that included a PSU, which was no doubt of exceptional quality too. But to be fair to the case, whilst it was just a generic no-name thing, it was all aluminium construction, it had no sharp edges anywhere on there, and everything fitted together quite nicely, it wasn't too bad at all. Now sadly at some point I got rid of that case, and I have looked for another one for a long time, and I've never been able to find that exact case again. Quick pause in the video for an interesting development. It was about 2 days before I was going to publish this video. It was all edited up and finished, and scrolling through my Twitter feed and this tweet from MS-DOS Manfred popped up. And I thought, hang on a minute, that looks just like my Windows XP case, or at least very similar to it. So I exchanged a couple of messages with him, and it turns out the case in his tweet is the Enimax Silver Wizard 2. Now this case is virtually identical to the one that I had from a Windows XP machine that we're recreating. In fact, there's only 3 differences. The front of the Silver Wizard is completely identical other than that little Enimax badge that you might just be able to see stuck on at the top, whereas obviously my case didn't have an Enimax badge on. The side panel, that's a little bit more different. The Silver Wizard, it's got this that sort of segmented window design, whereas my case just had the single type window. And you might just be able to see on the top of the Silver Wizard there's a few little vents on there, whereas my case just had a plain top. But other than that, as I say, the same, and the front panel's indeed identical. So whilst whilst my case obviously wasn't this Enimax Silver Wizard, I think we can probably safely say that it was, shall we say, heavily inspired by the Silver Wizard. Regardless of who made it, which I'd still like to be able to find out. Anyway, back to the video. So if anybody out there can point me in the direction of where I might be able to pick something like that up, or maybe even just a sort of name or a model number, anything like that, please, please, please get in touch. Drop a comment down below. I'd love to be able to pick something like that up again. But since I don't have one, we're going to have to recreate it. And in order to do that, I think there's 4 main things that we need to recreate. First is the colour. Hard though it is to tell in these pictures, it's actually a silver coloured case. It was that kind of time when we'd decided that we didn't want beige PCs anymore, but we hadn't really settled on a colour, so there was a lot of things that came out in silver for a short while, and not just PCs, TVs, hi-fis, all that kind of stuff. Before everything sort of then settled on black being the main colour for appliances, and it's kind of stayed like that ever since. Secondly, we've got the acrylic side window in there. Again, as I say, with modding getting big, we were trying to show off the inside of the PC, so we need to recreate that. There's also acrylic on the front on this. You can see it there on the front panel and on the blank drive bay, so we want that as well. And fourth, down each side on the front, there's these sort of colour changing bubble effect light tubes. I mean, they don't look like they're on in this picture. They definitely were, it's just the poor quality camera not picking them up, but you've probably seen them. They slowly cycle through a number of colours, and they've got these like little bubbles trapped in acrylic tubes. So let's take a look at the case that we are going to use in order to recreate this one. And here it is, the case that we're going to be using. Straight away we can see we've got an acrylic window on the side. We've also got an acrylic window into the top of the case, but I think that's okay. I don't think that's going to spoil the look of the build. We've got the acrylic panel on the front and on the spare drive bay covers. And we've also got the colour changing sort of bubble effect light tubes down either side at the front. So yeah, 3 out of the 4 things that we wanted. I think this is a good case to start with. Now obviously it's not silver, it's in beige, but we can fix that, and to be honest that's not even the main problem with using this case. If you've seen in my cleaning PC parts video, this is the case that those parts came from, so you probably know what I'm about to say here. Just to be clear though, the parts that are currently in this case, we're not going to be using those in the Windows XP build. This is just how I bought it from the seller. And it's come from the home of somebody who either vaped or something like that, and it's quite dirty inside. Everything's a little bit sticky on it, which is not very nice. But worst of all for me personally is the smell. It's one of those sort of vaping smells, that fruity, sort of artificially hyper sweet smell. The smell that's sort of so strong that if you smell it in the air, you sort of taste it as much as you do smell it. If you've smelt it, you know the smell that I mean. So we're going to have to strip the parts out of this system, then we're going to have to strip the case down to its sort of individual bits, and then we're going to have to give it a damn good clean. So with everything clean, it's time to start painting some of these parts silver. Now, all the plastic parts, they all had 2 coats of a plastic primer, and likewise all the metal parts, they had 2 coats of a metal primer. I'm not going to show you every process of painting, it's just what you can see here repeated a number of times really, but following that it was 2 or 3 coats of colour depending on how much was required for a nice even finish, and then finally a couple of coats of clear coat just to give it that kind of hard wearing finish. And with the painting finished, it's time for some reassembly. So the acrylic covers for the drive bays, they either snap on or there's just 2 little Allen head screws holding on the 5 1/4 inch ones, one at either side. And likewise for the piece of acrylic on the front, there's just 4 screws holding that on. Because one thing I've not considered when I was doing this was that being a sort of slightly shiny silver colour, I've now made it much harder for myself to try and film without reflections everywhere. And then I've put down the 70s towel so that we don't scratch anything. And I need to start getting the cable in, the sort of electronics in that powers all the lights and at the front and switches and whatnot. So we've got a switch here for this little circuit board that does those bubble effect lights. That button just pushes back on, and then the circuit board and the switch, they just screw down. Then it's a matter of getting the kind of bubble tubes in place, and you'll notice that these wires are cut. Now they join with that circuit board that we've just seen, but as you can see they feed through these holes here. So there was no way of getting these off, unfortunately, without cutting the wires, and obviously I needed to get them off completely out of the way in order to clean these and paint them. So a little bit annoying, but not a big deal. We can solder them back together. In fact, if you go back and look at those wires where they come off the circuit board, you'll see they've all got little resistors in line to drop the voltage for the LEDs in the end of these. So that's probably where they would have been soldered up originally. I'll just solder them back together. It won't be a big job. As before, these end parts screw on from the back, and then it's just a case of repeat the process on the other side, and that's both of them done. The reset switch and the main and off switch, they just pop in here from the front. I have to say I'm not a fan of this main and off switch, this kind of plastic crystal-y type design. I think something just plain would have looked much better here. This off switch definitely looks pretty cheap and tacky. Although to be fair, you might think this whole build looks cheap and tacky. And then the actual electrical switches for those sort of push buttons, if you like, they just clicking from the back. The LEDs for them, they just poke through the little holes. Although the lower one, which I presume is the drive activity LED, the little light guide that goes into the hole with that. And then when I'm finished and when all this is wired up, I'll just hold these in with a blob of hot glue, just to be on the safe side, make sure they're not going to go anywhere. Now here's a little enclosure that sort of holds the USB ports, 3.5mm headphones and line microphone in, that kind of thing, and the Firewire port. You access it through the opening at the bottom of the front panel, but it's actually attached to the case. Now first up, we've got to screw this little circuit board inside this. There's just a couple of screws here to hold that on, one at each side. And then when we're finished, a couple of screws hold that to the bottom of the case on the front. Then we're installing the top piece of acrylic in the case. Unfortunately, it's got this crack in here and this top piece is pretty badly scratched up. I suspect that a lot of things were just perhaps stored on top of this. But there's not a lot I can do about it, I'm afraid. I mean, maybe some of these smaller scratches could be polished out, but to be honest, I've got no idea what I'd be doing with that, and I fear I'd be making, I'd just make it worse rather than better, make it all cloudy and horrible or something. So I've cleaned it up. We're just going to have to live with the odd scratch or two. Then it's just a case of putting in the 7 screws around the outside to hold it in. Should be 8 screws, but one was missing with the case. They're an odd little size, almost like a very small self-tapper, and I haven't got anything that matches, so for now we'll just stick with 7. And then we'll turn the case over and give it some new feet. No idea what happened to the original ones, this is just how I got it, but I've got these little black stick-on rubber ones, and these will be just the job. Then I've got some new old stock sort of clear plastic fans here to go in these 2 fan locations on the front of the case. Now the only slight problem with these fans is you can see that green strip around the outside. There's 3 little LEDs mounted to that strip, and I don't know what colour these LEDs are. It doesn't say anything on the packaging, and frankly I don't want LEDs lighting up the inside of this thing. It's just not what we really had back then, so all we'll do, we'll get the side cutters, we'll cut the little positive and negative cable that go to the LED strip, and then cut the strip, unpeel it and take it off. It's left a little bit of sticky residue where it was glued onto the sides, but a bit of sticky stuff remover, I'll soon get that off. And with both fans cleaned, we'll just hold them to the front of the case with the little mount screws that come with them. Just out of interest, I did plug one of these LED strips that I've cut off onto the benchtop power supply, and as we can see we've got 1 red, 1 green, 1 blue LED, so even if we did want LEDs inside the case they wouldn't fit in with the colour scheme anyway, so I think it was the right decision to cut them off. And then turning our attention to the side panel, we can get the acrylic window screwed back in. Just like the acrylic top panel, there's a load of these little screws to go in around the outside. Just got to be careful not to over tighten them and damage it. I'm not going to put a fan on that fan mount in the middle of the window. Didn't have one in the original case, and just think it kind of blocks the view of the stuff inside, so we'll just leave that as is. So there we have it, our finished case, and yeah, it's got the odd scratch here and there, the odd little bump, but compared to what we started with, I think that looks a million times better. I also think we're really starting to capture that sort of early 2000s look that we're going for, and it's going to make a really good base for our build. So I think we'll leave it there for part 1. Come join me again in part 2, where we'll put some hardware in this case, and we'll put the case lighting in too. I really hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, give us a thumbs up or a comment down below. But for now, I'm just going to say thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.